All right, Tom, the floor is yours.
All right, well, welcome everybody um, to what day is today?
It's
Wednesday,
the 9th.
October 9th, Legislative Committee meeting for the SBCC. Um, Looks like most everybody's here. If there's anybody that would like to introduce themselves, they are welcome to do so. I see an old face here coming up, or at least an old name that I recognize. Micah, welcome. Um,
We should probably do a roll call before we move on
yeah,
further.
a roll call would be next. Yes.
All right, Committee Chair Tom Handy,
Here.
Damon Doyle,
Here.
Todd Bayreuther,
Here.
Jay Arnold,
Here.
Roger Hiringa,
Here.
Chell Anderson,
Present.
Matthew Hepner. Not seeing them in the attendees list here. And Council ex officio member, Representative Alex Rammel. I'm not seeing them in the attendees list either today. We have a quorum. And we're good to go.
All right. Is there
Okay.
anybody else that would like to introduce themselves? They do, just on mic and go ahead. All right, we'll move on then.
You got a hand up.
Oh,
You got one
sorry.
hand up.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm just Elizabeth Torsky with Cascade Natural Gas. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. The next thing on the agenda then is to review and approve the agenda.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded to approve. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is to review and approve the minutes from the October 2 meeting.
So these weren't ready in time to be posted for the meeting, but I do have them here. I can show them real quick, but I would like to hold off on approval till the next legislative committee meeting for them. Let me get up here. Where are they? There we go. Anything in particular I could go back and focus in on, or you want to move on from this one for now?
Nothing that I saw that I need to focus in on. You know, if we want to wait till the next time to approve them after everybody's had a chance to have them in their hands, then we can do that.
And give the public some time to digest it if there's any corrections they see as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And the next, ready for, I guess, item number 4.
Item number 4 is public comment for items not on the agenda. If anybody does have anything they want to offer, please raise your hand. Micah.
I guess it's not on the agenda, but it's about the agenda. Can you share where the location of the documents that are part of the meeting are located? When you select the link on the agenda, it goes back to the meeting link, but there's no documents anywhere to be found.
Yes, the documents for today, we're still in the process of drafting everything. So there's no documents that were posted for today's meeting.
All right, thanks, Dustin. Is there a way you can, I guess you'll be sharing the screen on those?
I'll be sharing screen today as we discuss the letter back to Representative Dewar on the WUI code, and then for agenda item number 6, there's it's just been discussion on that topic, and it's something we're trying to get prepped for the 25 session. So we're in a stance ready to act if needs to be.
Thanks.
All right. So I guess anybody else with comment, or else I'll go ahead and share the draft that we were looking at for our letter to Rep. Doer.
Go for it.
All right. So we had this one that we were discussing last week at the meeting. We had a lot of discussion on overarching issue being that having code language drafted into the word of the law is problematic for the code council. And we were struggling with some language there in the third paragraph to kind of illustrate that. And we kind of left it there, and I was not able to get a draft of this letter further modified as compared to what we were looking at last meeting. And so we're back where we were at the end of the meeting last week, kind of discussing how this letter should be drafted out to Representative Dewar. At our June 10th meeting, or the committee, our government relations committee, Todd and I spoke, and she asked for a proposed solution to language in RCW 19.27.560. But as we discussed, we have a larger concern with legislation coming down that might contain that code language. So we want to grasp that concern and also address Section 560. We proposed removal of the sections in 560 that have the code language, and with a replacement of a succinct statement of the intent of the legislation. And so I will open it up back there for folks to have input, and I'm ready to make changes here. And anybody from the public, if you have comments or input on this as well, we're welcoming that input as well.
I
Go ahead,
would,
Tom.
I'll just kick things off real quick. I mean, I just had one word that to start off with in that paragraph that has the red text in it. It says amendment powers of the council. To me, the word powers is a little, I don't know. I maybe change that with duties
Or authority, maybe?
or authority.
Or
Either
ability.
way, yeah.
How about ability?
I like the use of the term ability on this one. There's some,
I think
Maybe restructure the sentence.
I think I'd make it plural, abilities.
And Dustin, while you're in that sentence, if instead of trying to figure out what's the appropriate ending of the sentence as model codes are updated, you could just add that to the existing sentence. So it'd say, the amendment abilities of the council are restricted as model codes are updated.
Well, and they may end up being conflicting too.
maybe
With
get
the
this
model
a
code.
little bit bigger for everybody here.
I know that people like the word abilities, but my brain keeps going to the abilities to do something. Like the word abilities isn't quite right.
I mean, I don't know, I would maybe offer up authority again in place of that. Um, and I don't know.
Well, I guess it's the amendment powers or amendment. I mean, we are granted powers to amend the code by that uh, the WAC or the RCW.
Hmm.
One option would be to just say, by including technical provisions within the word of law, the council is restricted from updating model codes as needed, or something like that, where we don't even use the word ability or power. Yeah, the council's, it would be right after the council is restricted from updating the codes as the model codes are updated.
Updating and providing continuity, maybe.
Yeah, it could be. It's just getting away from ability or power when I think of Superman or Spider-Man or something like that.
Yeah.
Having abilities or power.
We could insert that here instead of the last bit here. So it would read, by including technical provisions within the word of law, the council is restricted from updating and providing continuity for Washington codes as the model codes are updated.
And I think the other thing I'd say is um, there's sometimes a bit of technical nuance. I don't have the right words yet, but there's a bit of technical nuance that, like when we talked about EV chargers, um, it just it's not it's a bit ham-fisted to put it in the legislation because there's a bit of technical nuance that the code council is aware of that the legislature um, is less aware of. I don't know how to say that though.
I think the council can be more precise, perhaps.
So are we liking what we have for content within this one? I mean, I know Chell, you said there's some technical aspect there, and Micah, looks like you have some input.
Yeah, I see why there may be some struggle with this paragraph. It's really cumbersome. I just a recommendation is to probably lead with something that's more positive. It sounds like, hey, you took this and now restricting us. Maybe a recommendation would be to say the building code council, like you started with this task with the adoption, with the amendments and adoption of the codes per, I want to say it's RCW 2735 or something like that, where it says the SBCC shall adopt, amend, and all that type of stuff. It might be the wrong number. I mean, I know this about the WUI code, but it seems like that, you're not explaining in that paragraph um, where the technical provisions were included within the word of law that's restricting the council from amending and appropriately providing code language for Washington specific. I don't know. It just seems like a very negative paragraph, is my opinion.
So spin it by using positive language instead of the negative language. I like the tactic and um yeah. So I mean, I guess the main negative word I see in the paragraph is restricted. Um how could we depict that with using positive words? It's
I think you're kind of doing that in the fourth paragraph, and maybe it just becomes a combination of paragraph 3 and 4.
yeah. So, Micah, I know the WUI code's not your code, but you had a lot of input on it. And as you see it, the inclusion of the terminology in the 1927 560. Well, let me pull it up here so we can show it. Pretty much everything under subsection A down to subsection 2 is the code language we're referencing potentially for removal there. If instead of the technical languages included there, would it be better to maybe just include, say, the titles of the section? Because I guess with the most recent bill, which is 6120, the specific section numbering of the code was taken away. So the original drafting of the WUI code bill had specific chapters and sections that may change over time in the WUI code. So those were removed. But do we think it might be furthering the effectiveness of this bill and helping the Building Code Council do what it does to further limit the language in here and say, WUI code section 4 appendages and projections across ignition resistant construction 1 through 3 or some form thereof? I mean, the way I see what's in the bill today, it only includes ignition resistant construction classification um, 1, which is the most restrictive in the prescriptive code. And we had the 2 routes going in the previous version before the mapping stuff came down the line. And we either do ignition resistance classification 1 per the legislation, or you comply with the WUI code. Would it be appropriate to include those other classifications of ignition resistance construction?
Yeah, I'm even going farther than that. I would honestly remove any technical code language and just point it back to the chapter or 1937-031, like the rest of the codes do. I mean, there's pretty much outside of a few items, there's very little technical code language in RCWs unless it's very, very specific. And this is not very specific.
Yeah.
It's general construction. It's just ignition resistant, which you can get there with many different ways. This mandates it only one way. So again, I think if it's up to me, you eliminate all the technical code language here and pretty much point to the SBCC doing this and basing it off the risk map and all that type of stuff. And this obviously allows the jurisdictions to have their own risk map. This is just one method to obtain this, and it's not always the best. And I see Todd has his hand up.
Yeah, supporting that. I Dustin, I copied you in and linked to. I emailed you the striker that was submitted to the committee, the local government committee in February. It wasn't intended to be, but when Micah, I'm going to throw you in with me here, Micah. Stoyan and I, were informing this in February. I think Micah, you did highlight, the sections that, Dustin, you basically just did. To our surprise, they turned it into a striker and submitted it, so it's available to look at. But it does help you look at how big that section is. But it also, I'll raise the point that I think it's important to reconsider back in a different section in RCW 2731, I think, where it goes through the list of model code that should be adopted. That was part of the policy in 6120 that It's at only certain portions of, and we can debate that whether that is appropriate or not. It got a little political, but you'll see in the striker that I sent you that also was cleaned up and returned back to just the International Wildlife Land Urban Interface Code. You'd have to look at the striker I sent you though. But yeah, that's right there.
So
1B right
if
there.
we're in 1B.
I sent you another email with just the actual PDF because I realized I just took you to the committee documents.
Gotcha.
The other reason I'm suggesting to the removal of all the technical code language is it doesn't necessarily take advantage of the latest adopted language. Obviously, like other codes at the national level, they're somewhat fluid, and the language changes to best practices. There's a whole lot of WUI code changes coming up next code cycle. We're actually going to Long Beach in a week and a half, and they're covering a whole lot of WUI code topics for Group 1 for ICC. So that's the other reason to kind of remove that language is it's very hard to change legislative language compared to code language, especially when we get a new code language every 3 years that takes advantage of best practices, including WUI code. So that, again, is one of my recommendations is why we should remove those items. And thanks, Todd. I forgot we had submitted that to where it showed the strike through language or recommendation previously.
And so would it maybe, so removing the technical language and maybe including something that kind of references the sections not adopted in chapter 4. The reason I bring that up is this chapter deals with water supply and road access to sites. And, in now the RCW is escaping me, but we're not supposed to adopt water or road provision standards from the fire code. I know this isn't the fire code, but I believe that that's why these sections aren't adopted. Any input on that? Maybe instead of pointing to things we should adopt, talk about things we should not adopt, because it's kind of pointed not to elsewhere.
I'm shaking my head. Yes, there's probably things we should point to. I don't remember the exact language we had previously, but there are other state laws that allow the local jurisdiction to adopt their road standards and water standards. So there's already allowances for those. So making them specific here in this code is not appropriate. It would violate other state laws, which we don't want to do.
So, back to the letter. This fourth paragraph referencing sections for inclusion in the WUI code will be most appropriate. It sounds like with the conversation we're having here today that referencing sections for inclusion is still too technical for what we're looking to be able to do by adopting and maintaining the model code in Washington. So if I was to float the idea of referencing sections that we should not include, I'd have to go back here and look at the chapter 4 provisions, but there's amendment, but most of this stuff, subdivision shall comply with locally adopted standards. I don't know, most of this stuff doesn't really apply. I mean, if we did not adopt the chapter, would there be an issue by just not having chapter 4 in its entirety here in Washington?
I'll unmute. It sounds like the rest of the group is awfully quiet on this one. I think there are parts of it that many would say are important. I believe the addressing, locations, things like that, kind of the stuff that was included in the original draft, folks found important, especially fire folks. So I would say some of it, and maybe that can be relocated elsewhere and not adopt the rest of the chapter. I see where you're trying to go with it, but I don't have that answer. I know that when we had these discussions and fire was involved, they said, yeah, some of these are good things. I also believe in chapter 4, doesn't that cover the fire management plan or vegetation management plan? If you want to scroll down, I'm not looking at the same section you're under. I'd have to go back.
Well, all of chapter, like in the WUI code, is a little different than the rest of the codes. The amendments are separated by chapter, not necessarily subsection of a chapter. So all of chapter 4 is just in WAC 550400.
Gotcha.
Addressing and stuff is handled by 911 anyway, too.
Sorry, I should be clear that it's not the address, it's address location. So in other words, I think if your driveway is more than 150 feet, it requires you to have a secondary address of the street. It's visible with certain size letters, things like that. That's not necessarily captured in the fire code or other codes that we have, Tom. So I get where you're going with that. You're exactly right.
Okay.
It wasn't the standard for issuing addresses. It's labeling and location for identification. That's it.
And it looks like maybe it references some model code sections that were left alone in the WUI code. So if I pop open the So there are some sections left in here, unadulterated by the state in chapter 4. So here's what he was talking about for address markers. Okay. So maybe my idea of just not adopting chapter 4 isn't quite the plan that would be most appropriate. So I don't know. I think going back to um, just using the terminology in 031 that points us to adopt the WUI code and then maybe not reference 560 here um, could possibly be an avenue towards still adopting the code and making the amendments and keeping it going, and maybe the use of 560 would be more for the mapping and the baseline uh, work that has to be done in order to apply the WUI code across the state. So we'll have the after we have the wildfire hazard risk map, then we don't have any reference sections, and then we keep the rest of this in here. That would be just a suggestion, but I guess as far as an intent to deliver, you know, don't have the technical language, don't reference specific sections. Let us adopt and maintain the code is kind of what the ask would be for potential future legislation.
I think that'd be good. Otherwise, it could get so convoluted in time that it'd be hard to keep unraveling. Roger?
I've got a couple minor things. I wrote down as Micah was talking, I think he mentioned the fluidity of the ICE of the international codes. And as you were writing the letter, we were thinking about how to make it a little bit less negative. I wondered if we could work that in. You have the word form right above the cursor there, and it should be from. It's a mistake I make 25 times a day. Um, and then I actually have a minor edit I'd like on the first paragraph.
Okay.
The health, safety, and welfare of Washingtonians. Get rid of the first and, put a comma. Yeah, right there. And then get rid of the word the and or welfare, which reads a little bit more appropriate to what the intent of the overall code says. So
Okay.
And then again, just I agree. I like the comment about trying to make it a little bit more positive rather than negative. I don't have a good suggestion, but I do like that word, the fluidity of the international codes, how to work that in. So
I mean, maybe instead of the restricted, maybe the council is less able to keep up with the fluidity of the model codes as they change. Um,
I sent some language to you via email, Dustin.
I see that now.
It's more positive. I don't know if it's as positive as we want.
Here, I'll bring this in as a. So this is the language that Chell just sent me. I mean, I like that. I think that could replace the third paragraph there. Todd, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to, remind everyone that, the way that the charging language is stated right now, it was purposely done in the legislation to restrict the council from doing anything but the ignition resistant. So just make sure we know what we're saying here. We're asking again to allow the council to have the authority to adopt, amend, and implement the potentially the entire WUI code, right? I do believe that that should be the authority consistent with the other codes, but remember that was a contentious political issue. So does everyone know what I'm talking about? So, we're restricted from, for example, at the building code level to even consider section 6, which includes the sprinkler systems, the defensible space, the maintenance of defensible space, spark arrest, so all that stuff is off limits to the council right now and only allowed at the local jurisdiction level. Am I interpreting that correctly?
I think
That's
so. Yeah, I mean, because I think the general consensus was that the council had gone too far and it
Yeah.
needed to be rolled back. Right? I mean, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think our hope here was to have them tell us the goals and what to do generally, but not cite specific code language. Because section numbers will change and if they want to say limited to, envelope or, envelope hardening or something like that, that's different than saying to this section, this subsection, etc.
Micah?
Um, yeah, come back to me. Sorry.
Todd?
Well, I'll add that, being sensitive to, and Tom, I think you're right. They thought it went too far. I also think there's a lot of confusion, right? I think there was so much focus on fixing the maps, which everyone was supportive, that then there was potentially a little bit of confusion on the other end of that, where the authority to have to put some rules in around those areas. So I'm kind of wondering if it's time to have that open debate now that we're on track on new maps.
So, because I wasn't here as part of the development of the 2018 or the 2021 WUI code, um, was there specific tag convened for that body of work? I know we have one now, but was there a specialized tag appointed for developing what we have in the initial WUI code? And I would say probably yes, but I'm not sure.
It was not a special tag, just to give a little background, is that came through WABO and the Fire Marshals Association after seeing that the language was not enforceable, came together with a work group that I chaired. We put together a full proposal. We did have input from BIW and others. The meetings were open to everyone. Sometimes they showed up, sometimes they didn't. And that's how we came up with the draft language that went through the residential tag. Not as much time in there as we needed, quite honestly. I think that was one of the big concerns for the tag discussions, but it was approved by the committee and the full council. So that's where we ended up, Dustin. It was a work group. And then they said we went too far based on the whole defensible space, which is fine. Again, I think that it's not a problem that they want something different. It went through the process, but I think it is a problem that they took that authority, the process away from the State Building Code Council because some folks were unhappy with the way it turned out. I mean, it's similar to what they're trying to do with the energy code and other things. They are not happy with the way it's going, so they want to restrict or limit what the SBCC can do based on legislation. So this, though, is we had a lot of folks, even the real estate folks were, and the insurance commissioner, they were on board with some of this based on, hey, we don't like the most restrictive items being the only option in the language for construction. So that's where it ended up, Dustin, since you're here. I'll stop.
Okay.
A lot to get through.
Well, so for the 2024 adoption cycle, we do have a WUI code specialized tag formed, but not populated yet. And I guess as we look to do more work on this one, I guess the first question is, will the mapping be ready for us to even begin the work on that and how it applies, like we had in chapter 3 with this last go around? And then I guess if since we have the specialized group, it sounds like it's probably a little bit bigger than the work group that was convened with you chairing that, Micah. I mean, we're still hamstrung by not being able to make the changes relative to the law, but is there room for us to potentially put it together better this time around? I guess there's always room for improvement.
There's always a way to make things better.
Right.
I think the concern that's been brought up is are we going to get something that folks don't want? I think it's going to be tough a little bit to get something that works for everyone, although that is the purpose of the State Building Code Council, is to get codes that are usable throughout the state. However, we won't have to use this one throughout the state. We're only going to have to use it where the risk map says we have to use it. So I guess if we're looking at technical code language, I think it's regardless of what we put in the code, it's only going to apply to those areas that are specific to the risk mapping based on the legislation. So I think that you could probably look at convening the technical folks now, start working on a package, because it's going to apply if the legislation changes. It will apply based on the risk mapping. We just don't know what that risk mapping looks like at this point. And there may be a lot of work has to be done there, but we just want risk mappings done. That's it.
Tom, go ahead, and then I guess follow up with a little bit of thought on it.
Yeah, I just sent you an email with some language. If we use Charles' yellow paragraph there instead of the current 3, that's good background, but there's kind of no action item there. And so maybe this language could be the action piece of it.
The last sentence there is what Tom just sent me. The SBCC is the body best suited to provide updates and continuity for Washington codes as the model codes are updated. I like that. I guess we're kind of back to what we think should be in the legislation is specific intent. So if they wanted us to develop code for ignition resistant construction and leave out certain aspects, like, for instance, potentially defensible space, which there's neither a sentence or there wasn't anything saying we should or should not adopt it other than the specific provisions in section 560. Um,
No, it
I guess
specifically
this,
says we can't. Is that what you're saying?
well, it says we shall adopt in,
Only.
here it is. Uh, Not in 560. It's in 031. Only those portions of the International Wildland Urban Interface Code published by the ICC as specifically referenced in 27.561 or the Model International Wildland Urban Interface Code specifically referenced in 562. And so looking at that, oh, sorry. 560 number 1 is in addition to the provisions of 031, the state building code shall, upon completion of the statewide wildfire hazard map and base level wildfire risk map for each county of the state, per that RCW, consist of chapter 1 and the following technical provisions of the Wildland Urban Interface Code published by the ICC, which are hereby adopted by reference. So it sounds like they want us to address specific aspects of the code. And so I guess if a aspect is not listed in a list here in this RCW, then we shouldn't be adopting rules that regulate it. So, I think this is where the rub for defensible space comes from. But I'll yield a little bit. Micah, you have some further input?
No, I was just going to ask if I could get a copy of your draft letter. I'd be happy to assist some more. I agree with you. I think what they put in legislation is telling you what they want you to work on, but it's so very limiting. I mean, if all they want is ignition resistant construction, that's great. We can do that. Again, we'll do what they want to some extent. Even my personal opinion says that's a mistake. Defensible space works. Ignition resistant construction can work, but there are places it's not warranted. And if all we're looking at is a risk map, you may get ignition resistant construction in areas that's not needed. Even if they've got a risk, it doesn't mean you need ignition resistant construction. And the mapping is probably not going to be at a micro level to determine that, which means it's going to put a real big burden on individual jurisdictions to make that further determination as allowed by the legislative language currently. It's a tough scenario. Again, I'm all for getting rid of the technical language, and if they want this, trust that the SBCC, like they do with all the other codes, can find an appropriate path forward that's fairly consistent for the areas this is going to impact.
Roger?
Well, I go back to what we're tasked with, which is to write this letter back to Representative Dewar. And anytime I get in the middle of a letter and I'm struggling coming up with a language, I like to step back and just say something simple. And basically what it's been said a couple times, we want the legislator to tell us what you want, but we're the people that need the Building Code Council is the group that has to do the actual technical language to do what you want. And so to keep it positive, and I keep going back between the initial chapter 3 and the yellow there and try to combine it too, but don't we really just want to say, please tell us what you want? And then we're the group that will put that language together and adopt the technical language required to do that. And isn't that what we're asking Representative Dewar to do? Because
Yes.
we're not sure. I mean, is it, we were pretty sure it's not the defensible space, but what does it include? So,
Yeah, I'll jump in and, I think another way to say that is, we're give us the performance requirements you're asking for and but don't limit the toolbox. Because I think what happened, again, my opinion of interpretation of what happened was there's so much focus on the bad maps and then on developing tools to address those bad maps. That debate needs to start over again now that we're starting with new maps. And what are the appropriate tools? Because I get really concerned that you have this prescriptive um, requirements for materials in there. What if a local jurisdiction, and jurisdictions are, again, I'll use Spokane as an example. Spokane understands the problem. They've done a high level of resolution mapping. They're integrating with planning and defensible space and urban planning and so forth will be incorporated in there. So if there's already defensible space built in, then why should, on a project by project basis, some of these hardened surfaces be required in there, just because it's a prescriptive mandate. So there's no way you can, by statute, just you say, here's a screwdriver and that's going to work.
Dell.
Yeah, I agree with Todd, and I think there could be a sentence or two at the beginning explaining that, yeah, the building code council did not see the maps until after the WUI code itself was largely completed. And, we think, I guess I don't know this specific way to say it because I wasn't as involved, but the code and the maps are together onerous, but the code itself isn't onerous without the maps being the way they were.
Micah?
Thanks. I like where Roger was going with some of that on the positive language. Looking at the RCWs, maybe we pull language from those. More specifically is going to be RCW 1927-020, which is the purpose and objectives, really, for the SBCC and their adoption of the code. And then also under the adoption section where it talks about the council, it's section 3B, with the council reviewing the most recent additions in the model code, to say, hey, this is what you tasked us to do and that we have done since, 1974, as the SBCC, kind of please continue to allow us to do this and modify the legislation for the WUI code to, effectively whatever, like we do the rest of them. Again, I was just saying, if we're going positive language, I think we should pull from the RCWs that talk about our purpose, our objectives, things like that, the things that the SBCC is tasked to do with all the other codes, and we want to do the same with this one. Anyway, great ideas on positive language. Thanks, Rob.
So if we reference 1927-031 3B, we don't necessarily need to spell out that it includes the WUI code.
Three B focuses on the timeline though, mostly, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's the only place that it specifies that we'll review the most recent editions of the model codes. But yes, it does have the a bit of timeline in there as well.
Yeah, I don't think we need to include the timeline. I think we can also pull some stuff from the intent language of that RCW, which is a little further down. When you get into the intent findings and again, if we're just looking for language to pull into the letter that says, hey, this was the intent of the SBCC and we want to have the WUI code included in that, similar to the others. It talks about, the State Building Code Council shall promote fire and life safety in buildings consistent with accepted standards and all these type of things and consistency. And if we limit it to the one point in time, I think Todd pointed that out, or maybe that's in the legislation, freezes the code language at the one point in time, we can't stay, up to date or more fluid like the rest of the codes that we are tasked with amending. So again, I'd be happy to work on some of the letter if you want to shoot it over. I know maybe you guys are trying to finish that today. I don't know. But I'd be happy to do a little work on that.
Well, the goal is to have a letter ready for the council meeting here on the 18th this month. So
Okay.
there's not a whole lot of time left for putting that together. Our other agenda item doesn't necessarily need to happen at the October meeting. But we definitely want to have it at the November meeting so that should the council decide to grant some authority to the committee here to act on behalf of the council during the session, that we're geared up and in that stance, ready to take action should we need to. So, Todd?
I think another way to put positive spin on this is to make sure that the council isn't opposing any level of local control. It rather, in this code in particular, is recognizing that there's an important balance between the state level code and then um, the local jurisdiction adopting level of service and so forth. So it needs to know. I mean, it would helpful to acknowledge that straight out. That it's hard to get that balance the way it's prescribed now.
So maybe in chapter 2, the council acknowledges that um, there are differences across local municipalities that make the application of the code unique in each jurisdiction.
No, I just back to the comments on water service and level of fire service and planning and so forth. Like it's just where we're coming into these topics, and I gave that example last time where like the single access appendix we're developing, that can't just be building code. It has to be building code and development code and fire service and so forth. This is very similar to that, and acknowledging that up front is important so that it's understood that we're trying to find that balance between the state level effort and then the local jurisdiction, because this isn't the state building code isn't council in my history on here has not been opposed to the level of local control that's needed. But that was a point of contention last February.
Okay. So do we want to push this letter out a little bit more? Maybe break out a little bit to work and bring this back at a meeting next week prior to the council meeting? Or we can push through and complete a drafting of this letter and bring it to the council and post it. And we'll have some discussion at the council meeting and potential. I guess we don't want to make modifications at that council meeting. So we're making final motions on it.
I think if you just send it out to us, I'd like Micah. I mean, we can all reread it and propose some edits back to you, knowing we can't copy all, right?
Okay. Yeah. So
Are we prohibited from making amendments in the council meeting? I mean, I think that applies to rules, but this is a letter that has nothing to do with enacting final rules.
I guess I'm just a little bit hesitant to make changes on something that we're posting for public digestion and comment during a meeting on that one. I think you're probably correct, Chell, that we have the ability to make the changes at the council meeting. Because this is just a letter to representative. It doesn't have any effect on our rules directly, but indirectly.
I mean, I think group wordsmithing is painful and long. I think we've done a solid job of it today, but I'm sure the people on this committee and the public might have a few words they might want changed between now and the council meeting. Okay. And maybe we don't need another legislative committee to handle that. I'm just trying to figure out how to minimize everybody's workload and get this to be a good, tight letter that says what we want without taking too much time.
Gotcha. So it seems like the biggest bone of contention is really in chapter 3 here. Not chapter, paragraph 3. I'm trying to just clean up some of the stuff that we have changes on here so it's not coming out with all the markup. I'm trying to get that to work with me here. There we go. All right, so chapter 3 is where it's at. Removing technical provisions from the RCW works. I think suggested sections for exclusion doesn't really belong in the letter as we've been drafting it here today. Is it okay with the group if I delete chapter paragraph number 5 here? I guess these are combined paragraph 3, 4, and 5. Do we want to consider suggesting sections for exclusion in the RCW?
I guess we're not really proposing a bill here. We're just proposing that the legislature do something to create a bill that would do this, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I think the word section suggested for exclusion should be just really clarified to say what we want, what's excluded from. Like, are we suggesting that a bill is written that excludes these from the prior bill? Is that what we mean? And if so, can we be clear about that?
I think my intent when putting this together as a draft was to say either don't mention sections or sections of the code in here other than sections that don't apply. When I first drafted this one, I didn't go in and do a deep dive on chapter 4 and was not aware that that there are sections within that chapter still in effect with the current drafting of what we have going on. And so my personal feeling is that the section suggested for inclusion gets a little bit too muddy by going through and say, I think what we have in WAC 550400 works for that section because it tells us which sections are not adopted and leaves alone the sections that we still want in effect in Washington. So I don't think that suggesting sections for exclusion works for what we're trying to get across to the representatives.
Seems like too that if this does start to go somewhere, that there'll be an opportunity to put some more individual input into the specific sections.
Yes. If I guess that parlays well into our other agenda topic, which is what we might be looking to be able to do during the legislative session. I think that I'm gonna go ahead and pop this section out of here. Although I do like some of the research that was done in here as far as pointing to which wax and things regulate some of those items. I don't think it's relevant to the discussion we're trying to have with the representatives. I'll kill that one and accept the deletion. Pull that out. All chapters and appendices should be available for adoption and amendment by the council. And then that leaves us with essentially these sections here that we kind of are still wordsmithing. We could table this letter kind of as drafted for the council meeting, put it out to folks for some input on that here before the council meeting and bring back maybe a couple drafts and get that passed through the council meeting here this month. What is the say the group here?
Micah, did you want to have a stab at rewriting some of that then?
I'm actually sitting here working on it right now. Dustin did email me a draft.
Okay.
So the answer to that is yes, I'm already in typing away. So sorry.
All right. Well, maybe we can end up finishing it then.
Jay, you had your hand up?
Yeah.
I was just saying, it seems like we're close. I don't know the extent of your changes, Micah, that you're looking at, if they're substantive, but certainly close enough that committee members could send housekeeping feedback to you, Dustin. You can incorporate them as a staff recommendation for the meeting, unless Mike has got something big to discuss. If it's all kind of small wordsmithing, I think we could handle that via you collecting feedback and incorporating as appropriate.
I'm okay with that.
I think mine would be minor. However, I'm a cut it in half type person. I think that if you can cut this down to a solid 1 page, you'd probably get better traction. And folks reading it a little more thoroughly. That's my 2 cents.
And Dustin, I just sent you the testimony that we wrote back in June. I sent you the section that kind of goes through the history of establishment of the State Building Code Council and why this is kind of a departure from, putting construction code in statute as a departure from the authority that was granted, which again is their prerogative to change. It's just why this is a departure. To everyone's knowledge, to my knowledge, this is the only construction code with maybe the exception of that EV provision, right? The EV charging provision. Is that a true statement? Mike is doing a maybe. That's kind of how I feel too. I mean, I'm sure there's something else, but I just don't know on the top of my head.
There's a few others, but it's not major. But we have RCWs that are better developed in saying this is our policy, go do it. One of those is single exit that Wabo and others fought hard to do. It's like, hey, we'll do this, just don't put it in code language. That bill was modified. Same with the sixplex. Although that one's a little more robust. The other one that I think we've overlooked, matter of fact, I was going to mention that to Dustin, is the dwelling unit size. it tasked SBCC to have a technical advisory group for that as well for this next code cycle, which I don't think we've talked about much.
I think we touched on it, not at the last meeting, but the meeting prior. And I think that we were looking to do that work with one of our existing tags. But
Anyway, I definitely agree with you, Todd. There's mostly pointing to SBCC to do the technical development. There are a few things where major disasters have occurred, nightclubs, there's a definition there for that and requires sprinklers, all of that came around. And then at the national level, those RCWs aren't needed any longer anyway, but they're still there. Things like that. Accessible parking, which was early on, but we've had some modifications. But yeah, the EV stuff, that would be another one that I would love to see modified. It's confusing, has lots of questions in it. I think the accessibility item is a problem, the way it's written, but hopefully we can modify some of that in the future.
And Dustin, if you're able to just pull it up quickly, I guess what I'm trying to do here is make sure this is never interpreted as, rulemaking authority is some sort of power grab. It's just simply educating on the authority to amend, adopt, and implement, and just to, I
pull
think
up
it's
the
good to
language in
remind
your,
people.
you want me to pull up the language you just sent over to me?
If you want to, or unless we're done with this, it's fine too. We can.
No, I can pull it up, no problem. We'll put it right in the middle here.
Because what we're really saying is it just limits the ability to adopt and amend.
So this is what Todd just sent over.
So maybe that last paragraph's wrong, so we can. But anyway, gets the point across is
Maybe it creates one of few construction codes. Or do you want to maybe just,
Or just creates a construction code.
I think Todd's language is actually correct in there, that it is the only one that specifically has the only technical provisions for construction code. The others only have individual items, but not an entire code limitation.
okay.
just really trying to emphasize that it's a public process. We're limiting that public process with stakeholders and subject matter.
So Todd, what you have written here could potentially replace the entire first three paragraphs I have drafted here. I'll pop them out for the moment. Maybe this technical provisions from our RCW and only including legislative intent would be the most appropriate method to provide for ignition resistant construction within RCW 560 potentially. RCW and only.
Did we lose Chel's paragraph with this change, and was that the intention? Because I think it was making a separate important point.
I did pop it out of there. I can bring it back if we like. Let's get the advanced markup. That was not in there. Hold on. Let me pop all that back. The yellow one, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I walked it back too far. There we go. Okay. So let me finalize some of this stuff. Except to unhighlight. Except not work with me.
One other question I have for the group here, in 1927 560, that section 2 that says all counties, cities, and towns may adopt the International Wildland Interface Code in whole or any portion thereof. Does that give the local jurisdictions or the local authority to amend? Is it restricted in any way?
I don't think it gives them the authority to amend that. So in
Which means,
subsection 2,
I think that was the point I was making is, we're up to now, much as we love the ICC, it's a pretty broad group and we don't know what direction it's going to head. And
by my reading of that one, I think that they're allowed to adopt portions or the code as a whole, but it doesn't allow them to amend because I believe that that would be kind of in, I personally think it would be not in alignment with subsection 1 there, but Micah?
I'll raise my hand on that one. We actually asked that specific item of Dirk previously, and the answer was correct. They cannot amend without approval, like other codes where if it's modified for 1 and 2 family, they have to get approval through the SBCC. So the jurisdiction cannot amend based on the other RCW. So that was verified by Dirk in one of our SBCC council meetings, full meetings. So there's probably a transcript of it somewhere, but yeah, they can't amend it without approval.
and then that was your concern, if I remember correctly, that then that kicks it back to the council, which doesn't have the ability to amend either, but we have the ability
Correct.
to approve. Okay.
So
Nuances.
okay, so we're kind of clear up on this one. It's not a one pager yet. Do I don't think that we need paragraphs 1 and 2 with the language that Todd put forth.
I think paragraph 1 is a good intro.
So, okay with everybody if I pull paragraph 2? Simple markup. I think that we could combine these 2 paragraphs.
It's almost like that one should be first because it's the first in time.
I agree. Everybody else agree? Combine these 2 paragraphs.
8-point font size is the way to get it to one. I was kidding. Nobody wants to read that.
Nobody. Um,
Okay.
I was
Trying to
thinking
get it.
that you could modify a few things to where you could combine some of that information. Like you're including the date that they created. I don't necessarily think that's relevant if you wanted to put the RCW number or the Senate bill number that you put in there.
So include this. Let me just start highlighting a little bit.
Like I took a lot of what you have in that second paragraph, put it into the third paragraph where it says the council has been tasked. Technically, the council was created to develop, adopt, and maintain the codes enumerated in that RCW, which includes the WUI code. So again, you could eliminate that sentence right there because you're saying the same thing again in the third paragraph, first sentence.
Yeah.
And then the second sentence of the third paragraph is one of the issues you have, which could be included somehow into the fourth paragraph, which is already kind of long.
I'm just going to say, Micah, I kind of like starting with 1974 because it just kind of shows how long it's been a long-standing.
Sure, you could probably
So
leave that and say, in 1974, the council was created to
sure, yeah,
develop, adopt, and maintain. It actually talks about it was like adopt, maintain, blah blah blah, the codes like in alignment with the state's interest type stuff. There's some interesting language in the legislation, but
Yeah, and my only point to include that the legislature did is that it's obviously their prerogative. The power of the legislature created the authority of the council.
We kind of already are saying by including the last sentence here in paragraph 2 now is kind of reiterated in paragraph 3. So maybe we kill that one, give it a paragraph break. Says to amend the code and down.
Can I make an additional recommendation on paragraph 3? Where
Yes.
it takes an unprecedented step. Again, if we don't want to sound so negative, maybe it's step in limiting the authority or limiting the council's ability to develop. So the first sentence, yeah, say it takes an unprecedented step in limiting the council's ability. And I put something like to develop balanced code requirements appropriate for the state, but to amend, we need to be specific here in the WUI code that is adopted. And you could shorten that. If we're trying to get to one page, you could shorten the state building code council to just the council, since you put council in parentheses in the first sentence of the whole letter.
We're almost there.
I would
I
say
mean,
on that sentence still, you could go back and still modify it. Say to amend the WUI code, period. I mean, you don't need to say that to amend the codes, it is adopting, including the WUI code. Just say to amend the WUI code. We do have WUI code spelled out somewhere previously, or not?
uh,
We'd probably need to spell it out here. And then put the acronym in parentheses.
After 1974, you could also just say the council
Yes, nice
was
catch.
created.
Agreed.
could we, instead of having paragraph breaks, use oh, we got justified text in here. Where's
It's
the
going to be hard to get the signature block all on one page.
Yeah.
I think as much as we've gone around trying to get the language right, if it's a page and a half, it's not the end of the world.
I agree.
Yeah, I
It'd
agree
be
too.
great if it was one page, but I'm not sure to get there.
Is it most appropriate to include the paragraph breaks in there? I mean, like you said, we're not going to get those signature block all wrapped up in here.
I don't know. I would say let's work on the final the language before we worry about the formatting exactly.
Okay.
Second sentence, third paragraph. Again, we can talk about limiting of ability instead of removal of authority.
There's probably some weirdness going on here with the track changes that are causing that grammar error.
AI is not always right.
We could probably, for engrossed substitute Senate bill and engrossed Senate bill, you could probably do the ESB and ESSB. I think Representative Dewar would understand that. Again, those would shorten your word count significantly. If folks want to do that, I'm just throwing stuff out there. You don't have to do anything I throw out there, but I think on some things we could totally use the acronym, and on others we have to spell out and then use acronym.
I actually would like to add a word to the last sentence of the first paragraph.
Okay.
I think that they are coordinated to ensure that they are coordinated clear, concise.
There's ESSB in there again, right where your cursor is.
I'm sorry, which, oh, I see.
Right there. And that second sentence after limitation, you could take out of authority because it's already stated as the limited ability above.
Okay. Dustin, that third sentence again.
This one here.
Yeah, ESSB 6109 from 2018, and you can eliminate the current. It's just ESSB 6120. And you can eliminate as proposed because it's already passed.
Yeah, you're right. This was testimony during
Yeah.
session. So first sentence of that
Created.
paragraph 2, ESB 6120 took an
Yeah,
unprecedented
and the
step.
create is past tense then, created.
Yep. I think that paragraph looks great. ESB 6120. If you go down to the fourth paragraph, or reading the sentence, it eliminated the section numbers, correct? So we don't have to mention that again.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so we could change that. So it says legislation that includes specific code language and section numbers. So you can eliminate section numbers. This might be a place to incorporate the fluid language Roger was talking about. Maybe the last half of that first sentence somehow. You got any ideas, Roger? I'm gonna throw Roger under here.
I don't know. I'm focused on the second and third sentences there of that paragraph seem to not flow very well.
Right.
It's actually, you've got another in the last one. There's two short sentences in there that
Oh, I
should be
see.
combined or I like the last sentence.
Well, since section numbering's not included in one of our issues anymore, maybe we pull out section numbers, just pull out this whole sentence right here.
I agree. I think the model code updates sentence could go away as well. It's actually an incomplete sentence and we would need to add to it.
This one here.
Nope, the one before it. Model code updates include responses to issues raised in prior codes. I'm not sure that's really relevant for this.
I guess the point of that one was the legislature might have an issue with something and want to pass a bill on it, but the model code will probably include something like that. So passing a bill on it just makes it less flexible, I guess. That was the intent of that sentence.
I think I know where you're going with it. That's why I was mentioning maybe that something to talk about the fluid nature of the codes over time that Roger kind of mentioned might be a good.
Well, model codes are fluid and are updated to include responses to issues raised in prior codes and changes in best practices. That's kind of wordy, but
I like where you're going with that. Let's see it on the screen. Maybe we can edit it a little more.
Reasonable.
The model codes are fluid. Updates include responses to issues raised in prior codes. What was the rest of that language you
I
were?
think model codes are fluid and updates are made in response to issues raised in prior codes and through changes in best practice.
Which are made in response to issues raised in prior codes and and raised to issues raised in prior codes and changes
In best practices.
Roger, would you be open to saying updates are made in response to issues identified from prior codes?
Sure. That's a friendly amendment, Micah.
Sweet. I'm always friendly, right? You can say no. Say no.
If you wanted to even make that longer, you could put changes in technology and best practices.
Yeah. And then the next paragraph, council believes that removing the technical provisions from the RCOW and providing us with legislative intent or providing the council, yeah, with legislative intent or with the legislative intent, maybe.
From the discussion last week, legislative intent was has specific meaning to legislators. So how about legislative direction?
Okay.
Would it be the legislative direction, or would it be better as providing the council with legislative direction? Patrick, you have your hand up.
Yes. I apologize. I have not been following along closely. I've been multitasking here and I looked at your third paragraph and I just thought I would give you a friendly reminder that rulemaking power is just delegated legislative power and that the legislature is also an open public process. The wording in there, I don't know, Representative Dorr, but it could be perceived as rather aggressive. And I don't know if that's what you're trying to do.
So you're saying this sentence here could be construed as a little aggressive?
And also the next sentence as well.
Okay.
Patrick, I'll respond to that because my conversations with Representative Dewar as we were trying to explain this after the council took action in February. The concern was the public process in the rulemaking it's really a question to the legislature. Do you want this to be in policy making in the political sphere, as it says in the last sentence, or rulemaking in the technical sphere? That last sentence makes the distinction, in my opinion. Yes, they're both public process, of course. It's just where does the technical construction code belong? And then in that paragraph, it still we have to make it past tense. So ESB 6120 took. Is that correct? And then there's one more. Maybe the next sentence, Washingtonians had never occurred, or however you want to say that.
Maybe this limitation to engage in the established public process of the SBCC might ratchet back the intensity of that sentence. Engage.
I like that, Dustin, considering you already said robust public process in the previous paragraph.
And Patrick, I get it. It's really whether it's lobbyists and other if we really can engage at the level we do with the technical advisory groups in speed and power of the legislative session. And it's up to legislating to decide.
To Patrick's point, is unprecedented one that's overly escalating just versus stating the facts that say ESB 6120 limits the ability or limited the ability?
Yeah, I could soften it.
It just limits the ability.
Mm-hmm.
I just have one more, and then unfortunately, folks, I got to drop. Unfortunately, I'm going to my daughter's track meet. The last paragraph on the screen, it says the council believes that removing the technical provisions from the RCW, really we're asking them to remove it from the legislation, which would eventually remove it from the RCW. Is that correct? I may be off here. You guys can tell me I'm wrong.
I
Just a thought.
think that would be most appropriate from legislation.
Yeah.
I think what you had before makes sense because you want legislation to remove it from the RCW. You're not removing it from legislation.
Thanks, Patrick. That's why I said I don't know if I'm right. Appreciate it.
Hey guys, I have to jump off too. I told Tom earlier today that I'd be having to cut the meeting short. Couple observations. First off, good job, Tom. I think this council should adopt ChatGPT because it's much more quicker at writing stuff than we are.
Knows what you'll come up with.
So anyways, appreciate everybody's hard work, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right, thank you, Damon.
Yeah.
See you later, man.
So with Damon leaving, we still are maintaining quorum for the time being.
Can you scroll down just a little further? What's your last stuff here? Thanks, Dustin. The last sentence there, you're being specific to the WUI code, all chapters and appendices.
Of the WUI.
Or you could maybe even say the codes listed in RCW 27031. Do you want to go that route? That's another option. Anyway, thanks for letting me have input, folks. But I'm going to run. And
Thanks for having input.
At the tag on Thursday. Is that tomorrow? Yeah.
That is tomorrow. We'll see you then, Micah.
Thanks, folks. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Enjoy the track meet. All right. I think that maybe with that, we could entertain a motion to present this as drafted to the council this next month, and we can put the letter out there online for public digestion. I can send it out to you guys for any wordsmithing you might want to do in between now and then. What are the ideas from the group?
I think there might be a couple of tense changes yet in there's buried that we haven't seen, but
Yeah.
I think the general format probably seems, and the general context, except for maybe a word or two here, is probably worthy of moving on.
And then the third paragraph, just maybe consider whether you should actually reference the statute, and then in parentheses, in gross substitute or Senate Bill 6120. Now that it's done.
So maybe not quite following you. Are you saying reference the RCW there?
However you want to do it. It is RCW now, right? So anyway, don't worry about it now. But
yeah, it's probably a good point, because it is most accurate. Well, I mean, they're both accurate, but it's
just remember I copied that from testimony. So
Okay. And do we want to entertain a motion to make this draft available for the council next on the 18th, and we may have some edits that come out with some tenses and things like that? Or do we want to just include it in the agenda and we'll bring the documents with us?
I would move that we forward this draft on to the full council and make it public for comment, with the intent to adopt a final version at next week's council meeting.
I'll second that.
has been moved and seconded as stated by Roger and recorded by Dustin. All those in any other discussion on that? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Well, good. That was swift.
All right, so our next agenda item is just furthering the discussion that we have had on an ask to the council at either this upcoming meeting, but I don't necessarily think we'll be 100% ready on that one. We took a lot of time today on this letter. So let me show, I had started a Word document just to kind of memorialize what we're gonna potentially bring to the council meeting. I have on here just a kind of charging paragraph that we've been planning for the 2025 legislative session. And currently, as we see it, we have no ability to respond to the proposed legislation during the session. We have a desire to be proactive in responding to legislation, and the committee is asking for the following authority during legislative session. And I think that having authority to call a special meeting during the session only, should there be a large concern with any specific legislation coming down the lane, would be a good power to have in our pocket for this. But in discussion, if a bill's fast moving, the calling of a special council meeting may also still be too slow for us to react to something that's moving fast to the legislature. And then the other aspect that we talked about was authority to testify on bills in relation to the technical application within the scope of the SBCC policy and procedures, but not on the qualitative nature or effect of the bill. And so we kind of had touched on those. I think we had a consensus of the group on those items. I'm fully open to modifying what we have on the screen or adding to it as well. And I guess first I'll kind of ask the committee to talk. So Jay, you had your hand up, and then Todd, and then Patrick will get back to you after that one.
I like this. I would add, in addition to the authority to testify, to say, and advocate for amendments on bills. And then just a question on the authority to call a special meeting. The chair has called a special meeting previously, and I'm just wondering, what is it that the committee, what does this, if the chair was willing to call a meeting, does this speed us up at all, having the committee have this authority?
So when you say the chair, you mean the chair of the council, not necessarily the committee,
Right,
correct?
right.
So right now, I'm not sure if in every, well, I guess all the legislative committees that I'm aware of do also contain the chair of the council. So as long as they are there at the meeting, we could come to that conclusion. But should the chair not be there, so for example, the last couple meetings we had, Damon wasn't available to be here. So if we needed to call a special meeting, I think empowering the chair of the committee or chair pro tem of the committee, should somebody not be there, to call a council meeting would be beneficial. I still don't think that it's necessarily a quick enough action to be able to participate fully should something be on the fast track through the floor of the legislature. So I think it's a way to engage a little bit faster than what we already have, but it's still not quite there. And so, if there's something about the bill, um, you know, I guess, for example, if the WUI code bill specified defensible space, and for whatever reason, the council didn't like the inclusion of defensible space, didn't think it was necessary, and wanted to take a specific position to testify. I think that we would be behind the ball and unable to actually deliver that opinion in a quick enough manner.
Great. I think that makes a lot of sense now that you explain it. Thank you.
Todd?
It does make sense, although I think, Jay, you had good suggestions last year that we also need to set our agenda so that then the committee can designate someone to be able to inform, based on that agenda. So on the second one, make sure we leave enough room there that it's not just testifying to committees, it's also working with the committee staff, right? Because that on the actual technical information and then the bills. So when I was a state employee, that's how we made the designation. You could inform the committee staffs or testify to the committees. However you want to word that, though.
Authority to inform committee staff, or is committee
I
staff?
didn't mean to put that word for word, but that I was just trying to communicate don't limit the ability to work with staff as technical experts.
I'm not sure. You have to work that a little bit more.
It kind of contradicts the stuff that's in parentheses, though. I agree with you, Todd. But, the qualitative nature or effect of the bill, I mean, that's kind of what we would be addressing, wouldn't it, for the most part, unless I'm not understanding what that in parentheses means.
So I guess for the intent of what's in parentheses there is to um not steer the directives handed down by the legislature to the building code council, but to work with potentially the legislative staff, work on the floor, giving testimony on how the SBCC would make or would take the intent or the direction of the legislature and work it into our policy and rulemaking. So I guess the qualitative nature or effect of the bill just is to reference that we're not trying to steer what the legislature is actually asking us to do, just how they're asking us to do it, I suppose.
Well, to me, that's a little gray. I mean, it's one leads to the other so easily. Because I think in some cases it would be prudent to try and move it a little bit or to sway the needle, based on this situation.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get to is like, uh, for example, the WUI code bills, if we were empowered to say, as like one of the tenets of our ability to act that, technical code language shouldn't be included in the bill and to move towards legislative direction given to the SBCC. We still want to do the work, but we need to be free to do it in the way that SBCC is already set up to develop those requirements for Washingtonians. I'm totally open to changing the wording in number 2 there, maybe removing what's in parentheses if it's needed. And then, as far as, some other examples, we've got some timelines that need to be updated in legislation for us now. So being able to comment on those technical applications to our policies and procedures, not necessarily saying we don't want to adopt the WUI code or we don't want to adopt ignition resistant construction for the WUI code. We want to develop it and use legislative direction and intent to develop that in alignment with the law. That's kind of where I'm going with it, but if it needs to be wordsmithed a little bit, I'm okay with that.
I don't want to interrupt. I do have a hard stop at 4 o'clock, and I don't know if we will have a quorum if I leave or not.
Let me double check real quick.
If we need to vote on moving this forward.
Out. So Roger, if you were to exit here today, we would still maintain quorum. We couldn't suffer any more losses after that, though. Patrick.
Yes, I have a question. Because the legislature can move quite quickly, how would the committee determine like your policies or procedures or what to inform or what to recommend, what approach to take on proposed legislation?
I guess we're still in the development of that at the moment. So as far as a policy on there, it's mainly to give input that helps a bill not derail the work that's happening at the SBCC. So the desire is to mesh more with the legislature and hopefully get actionable legislation coming out that aligns with, say, for example, our triennial code adoption cycle and implementation dates. We would be looking to develop that policy moving forward, but I guess as far as what we're asking the council, and this isn't necessarily need to be for the October council meeting, but needs to be kind of nailed down before the beginning of the legislative session so that we are in the position to act as the council sees fit. We would need to develop more specific policy on how we're going to engage in what types of technical portions that apply to our policy and procedure would be open for the kind of input at the discretion of this committee. And I think it wouldn't be unwise to potentially draft some of this into our bylaws.
Yeah, I think the first couple of things that we've got here, you know, those are kind of easy, but then deciding for sure what types of things we can act on, I think would be the next good step, if there's a way to kind of quantify them in general. And then we can kind of get more specific as far as priorities go. One of the things, I mean, there's been a bunch of things that come to mind as sessions go on and meetings go on and whatnot. One of them is always, you know, the cost benefit analysis and how that works and how well that's tracked as these bills move forward, and who keeps track of it. I know we've got a work group on economic impact. I'm not sure how that group works within the council, but you know, perhaps, you know, I mean, somebody could let me know, but you know, maybe that group could help inform the legislative committee as to when something might go awry, you know, that the legislators might not be tracking, that we could inform them of, you know, some of the consequences on housing, say, you know, for some of these code provisions that they may be proposing. Those types of things.
Yeah. I guess, for example, having, ability to inform on timelines for implementation is one that's come up and is a current issue that we are facing right now. So I think that would be a good sub authority for number two if we were looking to I think engage the work group of economic impact. We may not engage the, I guess, expertise we would hope to engage on that. That work group is composed of all the tag chairs. And, while they are tasked with some specific work, it may not be as expeditious a route to get the information you were kind of, brainstorming there, Tom.
Okay.
I've got to run, everybody.
Okay, Roger, thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
Same here.
Was that in Patrick?
This, Joe, I got to run too.
Okay, Chell. So we won't have quorum anymore. We didn't need to take any action on this item here today. I would propose that we have another meeting prior to the November meeting, maybe another 2 meetings if we need to discuss it at length, and move forward. But Patrick, you got your hand up before the time ends. I'd like to give you the floor a little bit.
So it seems like you want to ask the council to give the committee authority to inform the legislature, including committees, legislators, and staff, as to the effect proposed legislation regarding the SBCC or building codes will have on the SBCC and the code adoption process.
Yes. And is that kind of what the rest of the committee here is in alignment with? We're trying to get some movement on. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it can be a little bit further reaching too, I mean, do we, and I asked this last time, I don't know that we talked about it much, but do we want to consider those things that, might bring lawsuits against the SBCC, and muddy us down in the process? Or do we just accept that as one of the hazards of the process? I mean, I personally think that it wastes a lot of taxpayer money if it can be avoided. But I'm just spitballing here. So anybody that's got some thoughts on these things, Jay?
Well, I think one of the things that we're doing right now is delegating some authority and want to get people comfortable with that. So the more that we start with what's here and say, okay, this is more defensive and preventing bad legislation or changing legislation that would be bad for the SBCC into something we can work with and see how that works for a session before we look at trying to do something more proactive. Because I don't know that when we're looking at proactive legislation, I don't know how this gets complicated with Dustin, your process around agency request legislation.
That's a little different. I think that, as a legislative committee, we are looking to be able to be responsive during the legislative session. As far as agency proposed legislation, that's a larger process that wouldn't be just a legislative committee working on its own in a tight timeline. We would probably be the ones drafting some proposed legislation and taking that to the full council prior to inclusion or submission to the legislature. But we are running over time at the moment. And so does it please the group if we convene another legislative committee meeting after the council meeting to continue this discussion? And
Yeah, I think so, because really and truly this letter that we're proposing, to Representative Dewar is kind of putting our toe in the ground of being proactive and making some legislative changes, right? Because we're asking them to undo something they've done, essentially. I mean, they're asking us our input on it, but we're kind of, like I say, putting our toe in that water. And so there may be other things that come up that we'll want to be able to have input on at that level, or that we're asked to have input on. So,
well, I like Jay's kind of thought of asking for a little, see how it works in this session, and then maybe consider furthering in the next session for 2026. And just kind of seeing where we go. But I'll I guess get a agenda going. If there's nothing else on there, we would just kind of, I guess I'll schedule 2 hours for this committee authority discussion to continue, and maybe we can come up with a suggested motion. I guess my intent here is to develop a potential motion that I was hoping that maybe one of the committee members would like to offer to the council at a council meeting to enact. So that's all I have at the moment, and I guess we should kind of wrap it up here for the day.
can do.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. Patrick, I appreciate your input today. It's helpful hearing from you and getting that outside perspective. And I guess stay tuned. I'll get a agenda for the next one out, and it'll be after the council meeting. And does Wednesdays at the same time kind of work for everybody here?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we'll stick with that as kind of the model, and we'll see everybody at this committee meeting on a Wednesday after the council meeting.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.